So now we ran out of questions, and I think what currently all of us, or what keeps us moving is coronavirus and the end of coronavirus. Also, I think we're pretty sure nobody of us likes to talk about this anymore, but I think it's quite of interest for a lot of people, and especially in the coffee industry along the supply chain, how to come up with ideas and solutions. Also for the future, what happens with the second wave, what happens when the future pandemics will arise. And I think maybe one of you can share some insights, what you know, what's going on about solutions.
It depends where we are within the value chain. So for example, if we talk about origins, for example, yesterday there was just a very interesting talk between Caravela and Perfect Daily Grind. Caravela Coffee is a green coffee trader, and they mainly work in Central America and Colombia, so South America, and they have conducted around 600 interviews with coffee farmers to get a better understanding of the impact of the virus in those producing countries. And what you could see there is that certain countries in Central America, they have already harvested all the coffees, and the coffees are either now in a warehouse or about to be shipped out already. So for those countries, the pandemic arrived luckily a little bit too late. And other countries, they are exactly now about to harvest. And that's where you can see that it's difficult for the pickers to access the coffee farms. Then the streets will be blocked, so you don't have access to deliver the cherries. You have difficulties once you pick them. You're supposed to deliver them within a very short period of time. So if during that time you're not allowed to bring them towards the station to process them, the quality will be low. And what we can also see is, for example, in Brazil, you don't need so many people to harvest the coffee, as machines will do this work. So we can see that several countries are in a difficult status, and therefore have or are facing different obstacles with the pandemic that we are seeing now. But some are fine, others are hit harder. And what also came out, that you can clearly see that where those countries lack of structure, you know, and there are many things that can go wrong in those origins, you know, the streets, the blockage, hospitals, everything we know here, for example, in Switzerland or Germany or in Central Europe, it's not the same case over there. But from what I have heard is that the outbreaks are not yet at the level where we are here, for example, in Europe.
You talked about infrastructure. I recently read some articles about wage workers or harvesters, which now walk from Colombia to Venezuela, for example, which is a tragedy because, like, it seems like the pandemic, as you said, is not hitting countries like Central Europe countries as hard as it might hit people in other parts of the world, especially which are not as wealthy as we are, and are not as fortunate as we are. And I'm curious if there is also a change in mind for the future and how to protect those harvesters more, to have a also more consistent harvest, or be more robust for future pandemics or future impacts of a second wave of coronavirus or whatsoever. But yeah, it makes me really sad to see that a lot of people around the globe are really suffering, and especially also in the coffee industry at the lower end of the people contributing to our cup of joe.
Yeah, you know, also during the harvest, there are some areas within the coffee growing region where the harvest is like during a very short period of time. So the ripening of the cherries will be more even. So you need a lot of pickers at the very short period of time, and they need to pick it while the crop is on the tree and is ready to get picked. And in other areas, the picking time will last longer. And you need to be more selective, because at the same time you still might have flowers on a branch, green cherries, yellow, then the ripe ones, and even sometimes some overripe. So you have to be very careful when you select, and the picking process takes longer. So you can work maybe with less pickers in terms of the amount of pickers, but it will take longer. And as you said, some pickers, they really migrate, and they go from one area to the next to help. And the coffee farmers, they really depend on them. And sometimes they will also sleep close to those coffee farms. So in Brazil, for example, you have like little small villages where the pickers would then sleep. And those houses and those facilities, they are not made to keep those 2 meters distance as we keep it now, for example, in Switzerland. So we have to rethink how we can do that in the future. And then when we see at the end of the value chain here, for example, now in the consuming countries, when you look at coffee shops, many coffee shops, they had to close, temporary close for a couple of weeks, up to months. Some of them were still allowed to be open, but only for takeaways during very limited time zones. So you could maybe work from 10 to 2, and then you have to close again. So those coffee shops are also suffering. And what you could see is really that some coffee shops adapted extremely quickly, especially the ones that work or they have even their own roastery. So they switched from having a retail outlet serving coffee to selling their beans on a digital platform. And some of them are really doing great. Then, for example, people having coffee schools. So you're not allowed to give classes. So many of them started to do online tutorials. Even the SCA started to work on online tutorials. So it's actually quite a good thing what you can see. So those of the community who managed to adapt fast enough, I think they are doing not great, but considering the circumstances, they are doing somehow all right, while others who cannot adapt that fast, they are really suffering a lot. And then in the coffee shop business, maybe also now is the time of the cleanup. There are many coffee shops. I asked myself, how could they survive already the last couple of years? And maybe now is the time that it's very sad. They really business and really check whether financially they're sustainable or not. So those are a couple of points that I see nowadays in the coffee shop business.
So do you think in the future that the coffee world in general might even get closer due to the digitalization, to workshops online, Zoom calls like we are doing now, shipping coffee? Do you think it's actually somehow helping in some kind of ways?
I think it's sad, because coffee used to be a product where you sit together, where you socialize, where you discuss things. That is also how coffee houses started in Europe. It's not that you drink your coffee by your own and then you talk about it somewhere on a digital platform. But on the other hand, I think that's what we are going to do maybe for the next couple of months to years, in case we cannot meet. And that is a way forward to stay in touch and to socialize over a cup of coffee, even without really physically meeting people.
I think to a certain extent in the last decades or in the last decade, the price of globalization was like we traveled so much to countries' origins. We had so much connectivity, not just via online, but also like physically being there. And I think the coronavirus is one symptom of this globalization. And what I discovered for myself, that's like a step back from this globalization to a more regional kind of consumer habit, but nevertheless staying in contact via digital ways or platforms to connect to each other. I think it's somehow like shifting and like a somewhat of a backstep to a more regional, more local kind of consumption pattern, but nevertheless being connected to all over the world on digital ways, but not traveling there anymore, maybe that often, and having conferences, having meetings, having, I don't know, visiting the producer and so on.
I mean, I have been traveling now to coffee farms the last couple of days and weeks, doing virtual coffee tours. So I have to say, I haven't been seeing so many coffee farms the last couple of years that I just see now the last couple of weeks, because you can really travel virtually over like Instagram TV, or like we do now in a Zoom meeting, to really go and talk to farmers. So I think it's a nice way to do. For example, just last weekend was the Expo weekend from the SCA in the US. So I wouldn't have attended on like taking an airplane, but now as all or many of the lectures and webinars were online. So I attended, I think 5 or 6 lectures. So that was a good way to do. And I didn't have to take an airplane. Most of you know I'm flying a lot, or I used to fly a lot. So I reduced my carbon footprint tremendously. And I quite enjoyed, because normally when you attend a lecture at the SCA, you don't talk to the person to the left or to the right to you. You go in, you take notes, you listen, you ask a question, and you go out. So it was pretty much the same without taking an airplane.
I agree here. Yeah, it's kind of, even if it's a situation where we can't meet each other, people always find ways to connect. And luckily in this modern, technologically globalized world, right, we can also use this technology to, even if we can't get there physically, we can still be present with through all these Zoom calls, Instagram video, and social networking, and so on.
And I think we also have increased awareness on the preciousness of contacts to other people. Like for me, for myself, I really like to communicate and take care of my friends, but also my business contacts way more during these times than before, when you were aware that you could just travel there. Now it's like somehow more precious even. And I think it's also a good lesson to me that how precious interhuman communication is actually, and a good reminder.